So this slideshow will talk about the first big upshot from Kripke's account of natural kind terms, although we'll focus more on what Putnam says about natural kind terms, since his account is very similar to Kripke's but a little more fleshed out. The upshot, just to prefigure, is basically this. If you adopt Frege's view of natural kind terms, or a broadly Fregean view of natural kind terms, meaning you think that the meaning of natural kind terms is very similar to the meaning that Frege thinks names have, then you have to reject what's called scientific realism. And specifically, we'll look at a version of scientific realism called Convergent Realism. So you have to think that science isn't really tracking truth. Whereas if you adopt the sort of Kripke-Putnam view of natural kind terms, you can hold the opposite, that science is tracking truth, that science is aiming at truth. Well, that's a rather striking consequence. Adopting the Frege's view of natural kind terms leads you to, or I should say the Fregean view of natural kind terms leads you to kind of anti-realism about science, whereas adopting the Kripke-Putnam view leads you to realism. Okay, so we'll look at why that is by looking at Kuhn and Putnam, and then we'll talk a little bit about a paper by Ron Paul and I. I encourage you to look at the notes that I posted last week and also to read the papers, especially the paper by Ron Paul and I, since I'm not going to go into very much detail about it here. Okay, so let's start with Kuhn. So Kuhn talks about the incommensurability of scientific theories. First thing to do is get on the table what incommensurability is. So here you have Blue, and Blue says, Bill Russell is the most dominant basketball player ever. And over there, Yellow replies, I did too wash my hands yesterday. Well, there's something going on here. Blue says, no way, Russell's better. And Yellow says, I did wash my hands. It's a really weird interaction, right? Blue and Yellow are acting as if they disagree, but their claims aren't in conflict. It's entirely possible that Bill Russell is the most dominant player ever, and Yellow did wash her hands yesterday. So why do they act as if they're disagreeing? If you were watching this interaction, you might even say, look, you're both right, or at least you're not even disagreeing. Your claims aren't in conflict. Here's the lesson. If people aren't talking about the same thing, they're not really disagreeing, even if they adopt an attitude that suggests they are. Even if one tries to sort of replace the other's claim with her own, it doesn't follow that the two are actually disagreeing. Now, in this case, it's entirely obvious that they're not really disagreeing, but sometimes it isn't quite as obvious. Consider another example. So Blue says, there's a new bank on First Street. And Yellow replies, no way, there hasn't been enough erosion to form a new bank. Now, to us, it's obvious that Blue is talking about a lending institution when he says bank, and Yellow is talking about a river bank, the side of a river, when she says bank. So in this case, it is still pretty obvious that they're disagreeing, but it could take a few seconds to figure that out, because one of them would say something like, "There's a new bank on First Street," and the other one would say, "No, there isn't a new bank on First Street." Now let's consider another example. Suppose Blue says a bachelor is a male, and Yellow says, "No, a bachelor needs to be unmarried too." In this case, it's harder to see the dispute is merely verbal, and maybe it isn't. But let's suppose it is. How could that be? Well, suppose that both would agree that being male is a necessary condition for being a bachelor, but it's not a sufficient condition, because they would both agree you also have to be unmarried. In that case, when Blue says what he says and Yellow says what she says, they seem to be disagreeing, because Blue uses the word is to mean has the feature. It's called the is of predication. It uses is to predicate something of the subject, bachelor. While Yellow uses is to mean something like is the same thing as. Sorry, the is after Yellow uses is, that one should be in quotes, indicating we're talking about the word. But anyway, Yellow uses is to mean is the same thing as, which is sometimes called the is of identity as opposed to the is of predication. So they're using the word is differently, and consequently it looks like they're disagreeing, at least it looks to them like they're disagreeing, but they're not really. So here's a lesson. When people use words differently, their words have different meanings. And so their apparently contradictory claims may not really be contradictory. In fact, they can't be if they're using words differently. They aren't even engaging with one another, and thus they can't really disagree. In the examples above, blue and yellow never express real disagreement, even though they always adopt the attitude of disagreement, and sometimes it looks like they would disagree. Sometimes one will assert one sentence and the other one will say not to that sentence. So here's another lesson. Claims are incommensurable when they can't be in conflict. That's what incommensurable means. One claim is incommensurable with another if it can't be in conflict with the other. So, for example, claims about how far away a city is can't conflict with claims about how big it is, because distance and size are just different metrics. If you say Minneapolis is whatever, I don't know how far it is, but say 300 miles from Ames, and I say, no, it's not, it has over 1 million people. Well, our claims aren't in conflict. We're just talking past one another. To put it another way, claims, if they can't be in conflict, then they're incommensurable. Sometimes it's hard to see that a pair of claims is incommensurable because they use the same words, even though they express different concepts with those words. That's what happens when blue uses is to ascribe a feature to bachelor, and yellow uses is to express an identity between bachelorhood and two other features. Okay, so here's Kuhn's basic idea, and then we'll stop this part of the slideshow and continue with the next video. Kuhn claims that any two scientific theories are incommensurable. What does this mean? Let's think of theories as collections of sentences. Thinking of theories this way is sometimes called the semantic conception of theories. It contrasts with the syntactic conception of theories, which treats scientific theories as models rather than something like collections of sentences. But we're just going to do this on the semantic way just to make it easy. So we're thinking of theories as collections of sentences, and so Kuhn's claim is that any two scientific theories is incommensurable, meaning the collection of sentences that comprise one theory are incommensurable with the collection of sentences that comprise the other theory. So how does this work? Well, theory T is incommensurable with theory T star if no sentence in T has the same meaning as a sentence in T star. And because no sentence in T has the same meaning as a sentence in T star, no sentence in T can conflict with a sentence in T star. So basically, if T and T star can't conflict, then they're incommensurable. And Kuhn is saying, interested in a particular kind of incommensurability that arises because the meanings in the two theories, or the meanings of the terms in the two theories are different, or at least of key terms are different. So Kuhn thinks this. For any pair of scientific theories T and T star, no sentence in T has the same meaning as a sentence in T star, and because of that, no sentence in T can conflict with a sentence in T star. That's the sort of central claim that Kuhn is going to make. Okay, we'll stop there. Next time we'll talk about why this matters. We'll talk about what's at stake. And then in the following video, we'll look at Kuhn's argument for the claim we just saw.